Social movements. Max Weber and power. Max Weber defined power as a chance or probability of a group of individuals of imposing their will on others despite resistance. The zero-sum view of power implies that the cursive of power has some negative consequences. Weber believed that such power could be exercised in social situations. He distinguished two types. Coercion is a force, usually in the form of military, forces and violence, and authority depends on consent. That is, people's belief that it is legitimate. Legitimacy can be derived from three sources: charisma. Some people have powerful personalities that inspire strong feelings of devotion. Hitler, Gandhi, for example. Tradition power can be derived from historical precedents, such as the royal family. The Queen inherited the right to rule. Rational, legal, most authority in Britain derived from formal rules, which often take the form of law, teacher, prime minister, police officer, etc. Functionalism and power. The functionalist view of power sees it as a positive resource, as characterized by legitimacy. Parsons, 1963, said that power results from sharing resources to achieve collective societal goals. It helps maintain order and strengthen social solidarity. Effective power must needs direction and organization. For this reason, members of society authorize some individuals via democratic elections to exercise power on their behalf. Thus cannot be abused. Power cannot be abused, as people can vote for someone when they are not happy. The view has been criticized for being naive, as it fails to acknowledge that power can be accumulated in the hands of individuals that are more interested in pursuing their goals rather than the collective goals. Marxism and power. Marxists argue that power arises from societal relations of production and characterize the economic sphere of production found in capitalist societies. The bourgeoisie owns the means of production, and the proletariat which sold their labour in return for a wage. The classic inequality is further dependent upon the exploitation of the proletariat. Labour power and bourgeoisie wealth increases by the fact that the value of goods produced by a worker always exceeds wages. The surplus value is pocketed by the bourgeoisie in the form of profit, and this leads to economic inequality, and this is a source of social and political power in society. In other words, power derives from class relationships. Gramsci. Hegemony and the resulting consent of the people has enabled the ruling class to deal with any threats without using force. He argues that the subordinate classes have access to power if they were politically organized enough class consciousness in order to challenge the control of the means of production. He argues that the people experience dual consciousness in capitalism because their beliefs are influenced by the ideology and the personal day-to-day experiences. These personal experiences may challenge dominant ideology and encourage resistance by active campaigning or other acts of resistance. Hall and neo-Marxists. Hall and Jefferson, they argue that the capitalist class is normally has cultural hegemony, and so can obtain the consent of the people to rule. Or pockets of resistance show that power is not a one-way process. Gilroy says that crime may be political act as working class groups may get some power back at the symbols of capitalism, such as wealth and status. Critics of Marxist theory of power. Michael Mann argued that there are two types of power: distributional, exercised by individuals, and collective power, exercised by social groups, ranging in size. These groups can be extensive, large groups, and over huge distances. It can command extreme loyalty. For example, John Jones of the People's Temple resulted in mass suicide. It can be authoritative or gained around rules and commands which are regarded as legitimate. It can be diffuse, it can be natural or spontaneous. Mann argues that the economic is an important source of power, but there are other, such as the world religious or ideological power, independent of the economic power. Military power in developing worlds can be separate from economic power, as elites have been disposed of military coups. State has political power, which results from democratic elections, such as the Labour in 1999, or minimum wage that did not benefit those with economic power. Michel Foucault, in 1980, rejects the link between social structure and power, there is a significant relationship between power, knowledge, and language. He argued that there exist bodies of knowledge and power, languages known as discourses. These discourses dominate how society sees us, and our identity of family, sexuality, discipline, punishment, our power to behave, then the power of others to prevent to behave in those ways is dependent on dominant discourses. Foucault showed that in the 18th century there was a shift from coercive power to disciplinary power, which categorized normality and deviance in the fields of criminality and etc. Bauman said that this type of power is based on surveillance and control. Disciplinary power. Discourses that control everyday behavior began in prison and asylums. People were not simply judged for their crimes, but rather there was an attempt to understand why people committed crimes. A range of professions with power to observe and judge people were created, and the work of the psychologists, social workers, and psychiatrists became normal. In the 20th century, educational psychologists explain this behavior, such as truancy. Biopower is the controlling of the body and how it's perceived by the population. He claims that in the 19th century, discourses on sexual behavior became dominated by people working in psychiatry, medicine, and social work. This edited what is and what is not normal for individuals to do. Focus that dominant discourses favours heterosexuality over homosexuality, and thus are punished for being different. Biopower shapes our identity. We consciously internalize aspects of discourse and show self-discipline. We avoid behaviour that may increase surveillance and discipline from official agencies. For example, homosexuals avoid any behaviour that might be misinterpreted to avoid attention and to maintain social order, power, and resistance. Foucault does not see this as an entirely negative concept. He says that though in the West, homosexuality has become more accepted, this has weakened the medical and psychological repressive treatments used in the past, which means that there's less surveillance, less punishment, and discrimination. Critics have argued that he does not explain why disciplinary or biopower evolved. He uses selective historical examples rather than systematically gathered contemporary data. gender power, Westwood argued that feminist thinkers focused on reversing patriarchy and status quo, and this was a crude attempt as it treats women as powerless. Westwood argues that women should use focus for work to show how they can take control of their lives. Women can use their bodies as institutions and controls of gestures, such as Princess Diana, and now created her distinctive identity through the media. Critics of Westwood said that she was exaggerating the degree of the power that women have in patriarchal societies, as women do not share equal power and status with men. Diana's wealth and social class position helped her gain power and be heard. Most women do not have access to that.